Okay, this is October 1st, 2013. This is forensic interviewing of children on campus, and we are wrapping up Learning Unit 2, and next week we'll begin Learning Unit 3, where I talk about children and language. And this learning unit, which is my second week of lecturing about, involves just general child development. And we talked at length last week, I think, about why it's important to understand how kids develop sexually, cognitively, socially. How kids mature and develop is real important to the forensic interviewer. And something I've emphasized over and over again, and I think you get it, is that kids develop at different paces. We can draw general conclusions and make general assumptions about how 7-year-olds think and how 7-year-olds interact with their peers. But some 7-year-olds are more advanced, some of them not so advanced, and take a little while longer to acquire a similar skill set. So we've been talking about general child development, and that will, an awareness of that and a mastery of that will help us be a better forensic interviewer. And one of the things we looked at last week was that chart, which is kind of a simple device to let you know, as a forensic interviewer, what kinds of question types children of certain age ranges can answer. Remember, 3- and 4-year-olds, forget about how many times, those kinds of questions are not going to be answered by a child. And what's important is not only that they can't answer those questions, but they're dangerous because they may attempt to answer them, and we're setting them up to for failure. Number one, they're inefficient. We ask how many times in a 4 or 5-year-old, we ask where, we ask circumstances that are beyond the capabilities of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, whatever that chart says. Number one, we're being inefficient, right? Because you only have a short window of time to talk to these kids. So the more time you spend on the unanswerable, the stuff that's beyond their ability, the more time you waste. Even if we can recognize, you know what, I messed up there, I know I did wrong, that question was too complex for that little 5-year-old's mind. But guess what? You use 90 seconds messing around with something that will never change. You ask a question that's developmentally inappropriate, and the more developmentally inappropriate questions we ask, no one's going to sit there and judge us one day and throw out the case or throw out the child protection action. But it undermines our ability to make a quality case because it takes time away, and time is at a premium with children, especially less than 7. 8, 9, 10, that's a sweet spot for forensic interviewing. You can grab a guy off the street and do a halfway good job interviewing 8, 9, or 10-year-olds, Now, again, depends on how traumatized that 8, 9, or 10-year-old is. Depends upon how limited, if they are limited, or whether they have any cognitive impairments. But generally speaking, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, okay? Good interviews. But 7, 6, 5, preschoolers, you only have so much time to interview those kids. So the more time we ask unanswerable questions, the more inefficient we are in a forensic interview, the more time we take away from the overall interview. The more that clock is tick, 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 ticking away till they shut down. Not shut down cognitively or psychologically, but they don't want to talk about this anymore. They want to talk about your hair, or the funny doorway when you walked in, or what they saw on TV last night. They don't want to talk about what we want to talk about anymore. So with 7 and under, you got a certain amount of time. So it's inefficient. The other thing is it sets kids up for failure, because firstly, if they don't get the circumstances right, or they don't know how many times, a jury one day, or some judge one day, may look at this interview and use that answer or lack of answer against the child. Gee, didn't know any of the circumstances. The devil's in the details. Kid couldn't give any details. Well, guess what? Most 5-year-olds can't give details. They speak metaphorically, they speak concretely, they speak literally, they express themselves in a variety of ways, but they don't express themselves in an adult-like way. And they certainly don't give the kinds of satisfying circumstances and context without our help, without asking good questions, that we would expect of adult witnesses. So what I'm saying is, when we ask things like circumstance, how many times, whatever else was on that chart, I don't even remember it all, but I would look at the chart to refresh my memory. When we ask those questions, not only are we being inefficient, we're also setting the child up for failure in this sense. We are undermining that child's credibility or believability. Why? Because the jury sees and goes, wow, geez, I don't know. Well, tell me all about in the shed, what was the first thing and all the things he did. I don't remember. She doesn't remember. Now they remember it. They didn't remember it before. They remember some of it. They just don't remember it in an adult-like, sequential, detail-rich way. Because they can't. So that's why not only are we wasting time, we're also, I'd say, setting them up for failure. Because anytime they answer a question in a way that is inconsistent with jury expectations, we hurt them. We make them look incompetent when we shouldn't do that. We made them look less believable in a way, less credible, less able, because we asked them a question of which they are unable. How many times? 129. Everyone's silly now. She must be, the jury kind of guessed that that's not the real amount of times. But you know what? It's kind of a sillyism. And you know what? This is formal stuff. Now, kids giving us a sillyism. How many other things is this child like being silly about? Or we're just answering because we want an answer. Let's not forget, when they say 129, 129. Everybody in the room, including jurors who are inexperienced with child development and forensics, get that that's not the right number or the real number, right? I got to assume they all get that. That's just their way of expressing a lot, a real lot. How many times it happened? A lot of times. That's how little kids say a lot of times. 129, 165, whatever. And I think the jurors get that, or even the judges get that, who don't have a background in family law and child development and that kind of stuff. But again, I think it tears a little bit away at their credibility, a little bit, they were being silly about it, we all get that. They said it very confidently, I'm getting 29, they said it very confidently, very believably. What other things are they just tossing something out there? You follow what I'm saying? We're setting them up for failure in a way. We're letting them throw out an answer that most of the room gets is just acceding to or giving in to the adults' demands for an answer. But now the jurors in the back of their head go, what else are they just throwing an answer out there for? When we never had to ask the question in the first place. We never had to ask that question. Because we know better than asking that question. Okay? And that's why that chart's important. That's why having an appreciation of child development and what children can and can't do is critical to a forensic interviewer. Okay? The last thing we want to do is undermine our child's credibility. We're there to celebrate their ability. We're there to celebrate what they can tell us at age 5. You'll learn when I talk in more detail next week about children and language. That children know more than they can tell. Right? That's the challenge. Even kids as young as 3 years old remember what happened. They process what happened when dad or uncle or grandpa came in the room, or where the coach came in, or the teacher's assistant in the daycare center. Whatever the bad person did, and I'm labeling them as bad, whatever happened to them, they process it. It's there. It's remembered. But it's hard for them to express. It's hard for them to tell. Children know more than they can tell. But they can tell some aspects of it. So our job is to figure out, especially preschoolers and younger ones, what can they tell? What is among, what issues, what elements of their past experience can we expect a child under 7 to be able to express with some degree of confidence that they're expressing what really happened? And that's what that chart's about. In fact, you know what? Let's, hold on. Yeah, let's check through this too. Let's take a look at that again, because it's that important. Yeah, there you go. So children know more than they can tell. And even children as young as 3 or 4 have recollections of what happened to them. They have a memory of what happened to them. The challenges in facilitating their expression of that information, their statements about what happened, telling. The program that part of is called Finding Words. It used to be called Finding Words. We want to help them find the words, to get it out, talk to the adults about what happened. And language is so important. So let's not waste any time over here. It's one of the messages, and focus on what they can do, generally speaking. Now, some of the things about children and language, and what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about children and language. I'm going to introduce the lecture next week, which there's a narrative PowerPoint on as well, but I'm going to do the same one here live, about language, sentence structure, how to use words when trying to help kids express what happened to them in the past. That's next week's lecture. Well, I'm going to give you a little preview into that this evening, and tell you a couple of things that I may repeat, and I will repeat next week, about how children think, how they see the world around them. Okay? And those are some of the video clips there. But it's fun to start out with the perspective, which really relates to next week, and there's another perspective about next week as well. But let's just take a look at this silly video clip, get us in the mood for children and language. Hopefully it'll play. Show all content, okay. There we go.
What do you want to be when you grow up as a grown man?
An actor and an artist.
An actor in motion pictures? Let me give you a little test. Have you ever done any acting?
Yeah.
Well, try it. Say Art Linkletter like you're mad.
Art Linkletter, like you're mad.
That's good. You're going to be a wonderful actor. Stanley Thomas, what do you think you'll be when you grow up?
A bus driver or a pilot.
A bus driver or a pilot?
Yes.
Well, suppose you were a pilot on a big airplane and suddenly all 4 engines stopped right away. What would you say?
Our father was trying to fly.
Mark Sheverton, what's the hardest thing about school for you?
Putting in my pants.
I'll bet you before you came down here, they all gave you orders today, didn't they? Very important before you come on a coast-to-coast show. Paula Brown, what did your parents tell you?
To keep my legs together.
When Jesus made the water into wine at the wedding, that's the story. What do we learn from that story?
We learned the more wine we get, the better the wedding is.
Now let's take a look at this first kid again.
What do you want to be when you grow up as a grown man?
An actor and an artist.
An actor in motion pictures? Let me give you a little test. Have you ever done any acting?
Yeah.
Well, try it. Say Art Linkletter like you're mad.
Art Linkletter, like you're mad.
Now, how would you describe that boy's processing of the Art Linkletter's question? What is he being? Very literal, right? So children can be very literal in a variety of contexts. That's an example of him, the boy, being very literal. And we see another interesting one with this boy.
Right away, what would you say?
Well, let's see the question.
And suddenly all 4 engines stopped. Right away, what would you say?
Our father was trying.
Yeah, that's not the one I wanted.
Do you think he prepped them at all?
Probably. I don't know. Good question. Some of them seem so pat, but
That our father was really kind of,
yeah.
This thing about School for you.
Button my pants.
Now, there's another example of, and the English language is replete with this ambiguity, right? And words that are spelled the same, pronounced the same, sometimes even address similar issues, but call for a different response or different information. Now, what was Art Linkletter, the host, asking about, or what we can infer he was asking about? We don't know what the hell he was asking about. What do you think why was that funny? What was the expected response? Right, something about the challenge of schoolwork, or doing your work, your homework, or something that happens in school. So what was the operative word in the boy's mind? Hardest. The hardest thing about school. Was his answer responsive? You know, this kid, I don't think he got it wrong. It was responsive, right? Now, what part of the day was the answer supposed to be confined to?
When he's in school.
Right.
Versus like everything which he associates with school.
That's right. Exactly. I mean, the question, and that happens, we as adults know from experience that the hardest, or the word hard, or the query about what's the most difficult is directed at during the school day and his presence in the school, the things that he does. Now, he might have said buttoning my pants at gym, so then that would fit in the school day. I'm not sure what he's talking about. It sounds like he's, again, I make an assumption. We'd have to ask follow-up questions if this was forensically important. You know, is he buttoning his pants in the morning? That's what it kind of felt like, getting ready for school, or is he talking about something happening in school? Could be.
To keep my legs together.
Yeah.
We learned the more wine we get, the better the wedding music.
That seems a little pat, right? But who knows? I don't, the more wine, who knows? They may have interviewed hundreds, thousands of kids, and some of them just were funny like that. Stuff happens. Kids say the darndest things. In fact, he had a whole show called Kids Say the Darndest Things. And, you know, the last, I don't know, the late closing one seems like, oh, that was, but you know what? That, like you said, that might have been a perfect construction. She is on national TV, little girls wearing a dress. Something that mom might have been very acutely aware of and told her that. And again, that answer was responsive as well, right? We were probably thinking a lot of things, but what made that funny was, you know, we weren't thinking about a behavioral thing like that, I think most people. How I got out of here. Now here's some examples of children's concreteness and children being literal from a forensic interview. Now, one of the things that people identify right away is the forensic interviewer is Giselle. Now, Giselle, you know, we've talked about this for a number of years. This interview is a few years old. We talked about how best to ask kids, about their state of dress. Because especially in ambiguous situations during wrestling or horseplay, messing around on the computer or whatever, or near the computer or things like that, you know, what they were wearing, what he was wearing, whether their clothes were on or off is important, right? Horseplay could be horseplay unless the child had no pants on, okay? Then it's probably sexual. We need to follow up. So the state of dress for the players, the adult and the child, is always relevant in forensic interviews involving suspected sexual abuse. We don't really like were his clothes on or off, for a variety of reasons. One is it's a forced choice question, which we'll talk in great detail about later. You know, I'll teach you that you need to add an open-ended part to that question always. And you'll see it's were your clothes on, off, or something else. But before we even ask the multiple choice question, and you're going to learn about the process of inquiry, the sequence of questioning that you typically should use. But a multiple choice question is a second or third resort. Your first question type that you want to use is an open-ended question. You'll learn about the process of inquiry. So open-ended, focused, then comes multiple choice. But most interviewers, most people, when they want to ask about where the clothes were, jump right to the multiple choice. So Giselle and I have always been looking for the perfect question to ask about clothes. And I learned it from students like you. She was using a very awkward one here. And she says when, and again I'm paraphrasing, but she says something effective. And the context there, she may not say when Billy and you were playing in the back room, how were your clothes? You may not hear the, remember this is totally out of context. There's a whole discussion about some fondling that took place earlier. But we only see the clip where she says, blah, 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 how were your clothes? And that how is a bad verb, it's a bad word. And what it did was, see, this is her, or us, I'll say, asking a bad question, okay? A developmentally inappropriate question. I don't even know that an adult would be able to process what the interviewer means by how were your clothes. What do you mean, how were my clothes? But certainly not the child. But the thing is, the child gives a response. And the only response he could give was the one that he remembered about his clothes, his underwear. They had Power Rangers on it. So he wants to answer. But what seems like it's non-responsive, what seems like it's chaining or something that the child is just throwing out there that's irrelevant, actually is the product of a poor question in an effort to ask the best question. So what kind of question would you ask if you want to know if the clothes were on or off or something else?
Where were your clothes?
Where were your clothes? Tell me about your clothes when you were wrestling. And they may go, huh, what? When you were wrestling, what were you wearing? Say. I don't know, what's directly mean?
Did you have your pants on?
Well, what does that suggest? Well, think about it for a moment. What does it suggest? Look, we're trying to be as neutral as possible, and an uncle is wrestling with his nephew. The family thinks the uncle is the best guy in the world. He would never molest a child. The prosecutor and the DIFAS people are there, and they think it's a sex case. So we want to interview the boy as neutral as possible. So when we say, what was your question? What are we suggesting to the child? Maybe that somehow his pants being off is relevant in some way, right? Not a terrible question, but why inject the possibility of a guy wrestling with no pants on? So we need to back up and ask more neutral questions, right?
Were you wearing your clothes?
Well, no, that suggests that you weren't wearing any clothes, right? What did I just say? I just asked it. You gave me a perfect one. What was yours?
Originally,
Where were your clothes? That's like suggests it's another room, but how about what were you wearing? When you were wrestling, what were you wearing? Okay? And then I might, even if you think, we still need to find out whether the clothes were on or off or something else. Okay? We still need to go there. But again, you'll see when we talk about process of inquiry, we want to start out open-ended. We want to kind of focus inward. And even a question, what was your question again? Were your pants on when this was happening? We may get to that, but we may have to ask that question because we want to know. But that may be a little down the road. When you were wrestling, what were you wearing? We were wrestling Uncle Mike. What were you wearing? What was Uncle Mike wearing? When you were wrestling, where were your clothes? On my body, whatever he may say. I don't know. Well, did Uncle Mike have his clothes on when he was wrestling you? Now, that implies a little bit, but we start out by saying open-ended. What were you wearing? Where were your clothes? And then we ask about the state of those clothes. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with saying where were Uncle Mike's clothes when he was wrestling with you? On his body, whatever. Where were your clothes? Then you might want to ask, well, were your clothes on or off or something else? Was Uncle Mike's clothes on or off? And the key at the end is or something else. We were looking for the question, the perfect question to ask about clothes without getting into the multiple choice or were his pants on or off, or was pants on or whatever. By implying even in the least bit that they weren't on or your clothes weren't on. So that once in a while, out of some subset of kids, they may answer, well, they were in the pile on the floor, or he made me take them off. We want to start talking about the clothes. So we want to ask as many open-ended questions about the clothes. What were you wearing? What was Uncle Mike wearing? When Uncle Mike you said Uncle Mike tossed you in a half Nelson. Where were your clothes when he tossed you in a half Nelson? Well, on my body. Where was Uncle Mike's clothes when he tossed you in a half Nelson? Yeah, that can suggest that they were off or anything sexual. And then, you know, if you need to know more, you may have to go on, off, or something else. Go ahead.
I just had a question.
Yes, I know. That's why I called it.
Is there ever an instance where you need to use props in order to ask a question?
Well, the prompts or props? What did you say?
Props.
Props.
Right.
Of course. Yeah, we'll talk more about that. Yeah, no, props. But we don't use them a lot in forensics. In therapy, they use clay, and they use dolls, and they use paper and scissors and things and creativity for a variety of reasons in therapy. We don't use them in forensic that much, but yes, and we'll talk about that. There's really one prop that we use here at anatomical dolls. Is that the kind of prop you're talking about, a thing?
Right, but can you use the doll for that kind of question?
Oh, you could, but we don't use the dolls. I'm going to teach you about dolls. But we use language first, and we use props later. And we use props when there's a failure of language, when language doesn't get the information we need. And, you know, if the kid doesn't get the question, we may say, you know what, I'm really wondering. In clothes, it's not that hard. Most kids answer this right. This is not a big issue, clothes. Whether the finger or the penis or the object was in the vagina or outside the vagina or something else. That's a bigger problem for us. And we'll address that later. That's a bigger problem. Their dolls help. Okay? Body mechanics, you know, sometimes children will give an expression of how he was doing X or Y to her body, which doesn't make sense. You know, I was sitting in the chair and he put his peanut wiener in my butt. And you're like, well, you might say, well, I'm trying to understand what happened, Danielle. If you were sitting in a giant wicker chair and he was behind the chair, I'm not understanding how his wiener went in your butt. He was behind the chair. Tell me more about that. Again, she made all those statements. Well, he went over by the chair and he put his wiener in my butt. Well, that's what I call body mechanics, right? And I say, you know, I'm trying real hard to understand this. I have these dolls, Danielle. These are not to play with. We use these dolls to help talk to kids. And I want you to tell me which doll looks most like you. You're going to get this lesson, so I'm giving you a preview. Which doll looks most like you? Which doll looks most like Uncle Mike? Okay, I'm a little mixed up with when you were in the big wicker chair, how Uncle Mike got his wiener on your butt. Would show me with these dolls. And then they take the dolls and they so that's body mechanics, right? Sometimes in or on. Certainly clothes, we'll get that. That's the great thing about the dolls, you're right. They start taking off the clothes. You say, I see you're pulling down Uncle Mike's pants. Tell me more about that. Well, he took them off before we wrestled. Okay, tell me, you know, go ahead and show me more. So the dolls are very effective at getting the clothing issue answered, so your intuition is dead on. We don't really have too many problems. The language usually works. You took your pants off, you know, it usually works. But you know what, we're experts at this. We're always looking for perfect questions. I'm just doing a long-winded setup to why Giselle asked a question that you might go, because I've had this as a discussion forum, and people, you know, they pile on. Sure they ask how stupid students, kids at that age don't know what how is, you know, misleading, and you're all right. We should ask how. We did. The point, though, in this little clip is a matter of seconds is the boy's response. So the learning element here is we get the literal. And not letting us know he doesn't really get the question and providing us with a literal response. Again, I told you earlier, when we ask bad questions, Now look, asking a bad, we all ask bad questions. We all make mistakes. There's no such thing as a perfect kid. None. Zero. So it's all good. Giselle's one of the most experienced interviewers in the country. We all make our mistakes in the interview. We try to minimize them. But that kind of mistake is different from what I'm talking about before. We ought to know, and you do now, going in, what kids at age 4 are capable of. We shouldn't ask how many times questions or circumstance questions of 4 or 5-year-olds, because we know they can't answer them. So we're setting them up to look not believable. In this case, when Giselle uses the word how, she does that as well, because the kid, again, we get past that. I don't know how a jury would process what they just watched on the video, but we kind of added an element there that kind of distracts from the kid's reliability and believability. You know, he answers they have Power Rangers on him when she asks how. And as I suggested earlier, most grown-ups might say, what do you mean how? How are my clothes? I don't get, where are my, what do you mean how are my clothes? I don't understand the question. Excuse me. Kids don't do that, all of them. They don't say I don't know. That's why there's some debate about giving them these ground rules in the beginning. We'll talk about that. You know, I talk to lots of kids, Danielle. Sometimes kids, you know, don't remember what happened. I wouldn't say that. Sometimes kids, when I ask kids questions, sometimes they use a big word that you might not understand. It's okay to say, Joe, you got to stop. I don't know what that word means. It's okay to say, I don't know. You know, to give them these ground rules. Because kids don't, they won't challenge adults. They won't tell you, stop, I don't know what you mean, ask it a different way. They just don't operate that way. Once in a blue moon a kid does, and if you give them permission at the beginning, like I just suggested, they may do that. So what's happening here, I think the boy is Clinton. I'm not sure. But what's happening here is he's not saying how. What do you mean how? I don't get that. He asks the question differently. He reflects and tells us his response, what he thinks the question means. And we got a disconnect here, man. And as Professor John Myers, the great professor of evidence from the George University out in California, says, assume you and the child are on different pages and you got a good start. Because you are. You're on different pages. We got to get closer to the same page as we can. We're never on the same page. It's the way it is. But we need to minimize the distance between our page and their page. I'm mixing metaphors, aren't I? But anyway, you need to get here rather than here. And here, Giselle's asking this, and he's answering that. And that's okay. We learn, you know, from our mistakes, right? And that's what we're trying to do here. In fact, there's a great video I want to get. From Michael Jordan, a Nike commercial, where he's walking in a locker room and he goes something like, I missed, in my career I missed 4,753 shots. 26 times my teammates gave me the basketball to make the game-winning shot and I missed it. And then he ticks off 3 or more expressions of failure. Great Michael Jordan, if you don't know. Probably the best guard or best player to ever play basketball, ever. But he's talking about all the times he didn't do well. And then it ends with some like statement about, that's how I became the best basketball player in history or whatever, blah, 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 because he made mistakes and he learned from those mistakes. And that's what we hope here. So the lesson here too is how kids think concrete and literal as way. This is how he described his underwear. Oh, and the other thing is, and the more important thing is, to him, we're trying to find out what he's wearing under his pants. And she wants to know if he's wearing underwear. And I don't know, he might have said no earlier or whatever, but he says no, and then he's telling us about boxers. And the interviewer's going, well, you are wearing underwears. No, I'm not. It doesn't flow that way. I'm embellishing that a little bit, but the point is, Giselle's, as an adulthood, boxers, briefs, boxer briefs, thongs, whatever. We know that all those things are on the general, underwears is a general term. All these things are sub-parts. But to him, they're two, underwears are jockey underpants to him, you know, tighty whities, whatever. And boxers are a different thing. And they're not related. And there's a little confusion about that. And he's being very literal. Okay, I think it's coming out of one channel. That's why we're not hearing it. This might not be a stereo thing. You'll hear it now.
You said he pulled your pants down. Do you wear something under your pants?
Huh?
Do you wear something under your pants?
You mean under my underwears? No.
Okay. Do you wear underwears?
Yes. And boxers.
And boxers. Okay. Now, how were you wearing boxers and underwear that day? Do you
I
remember?
wasn't wearing underwear.
You were wearing underwear. Okay. So you said he took your pants down. How were your underwear when he tried to do this to you? How were your underwear when Todd tried to do this to you?
It had Power Rangers on it.
It had Power Rangers on it. Okay, I'm gonna write that down too.
Now, I didn't notice this till just now. He does kind of say, how are my underwear? What does that mean? I'm not sure. What did he say? What did he say? She says, how are your underwears? What did he say? If anything, he didn't say anything. What did he do? What did he communicate? How? What did he say?
He said it again. Like, how are my underwear?
Well, he did that. Look, let's look at it.
Yeah, I think it's about to show with,
Yeah, but he said so. Well, he didn't say anything. He communicated, which I'm here. You'll see it.
Just on it.
Oh, here.
Tried to do this to you. How were your
There it is.
How were your underwear when he tried to do this to you? How were your underwear
What does he do?
when Todd tried to do this?
Huh? Huh? What? Huh? Same. Huh? You don't get it. Now, look, you're in the middle of the interview. Giselle's not picking up the metadata. He doesn't get it. That's what you do eventually. That's what a good interview eventually does. When he says, huh? And she says, how are your underwear? She probably heard it, but she didn't realize the depth of his confusion about that awkward expression, how are your underwear?
wait, is this the entire interview?
No, this is the second.
Okay, no, because she said that you said that he took the pants off.
Yeah, well, yeah, you didn't see it. I just cut this out
Okay,
of
alright.
probably a 60-minute interview. Yeah, she's referring back to things he reported in the past in this interview. And she's clarifying things about his clothes and things that were happening.
Would that be considered a bad question? If they, because you said this.
Well, how are your underwear?
Yeah, that's it.
Well, yeah, we're learning it's a bad question. Now, look, for us, in advanced forensics here, it's a bad question. It's a bad question for anybody. But it's not a bad question in the sense that it's leading or suggestive or might result in an innocent man going to prison. It's bad in the sense that, for us, it's bad because it resulted in a non-responsive answer. Okay? It was born of confusion. And you want to avoid confusion when you're speaking to children. You want to, get as much information that's valid and responsive as you can, and as little that's non-responsive. So yeah, that's a bad question because it created confusion in him. And we know it's confusion because he didn't answer it. He answered it in a disconnect. He said Power Rangers. Now, his underwear probably had Power Rangers and whatever else on it. It's not being wrong. We're not communicating. It was a miscommunication. And it happens all the time. So Giselle would need to go back and scrap the how. I told you why we're doing it. We're trying to not be leading. Instead, what's your first name again? We should have done what Jessica had and said, where were your clothes? Now, there's a boy and him. Something's happening. I don't remember the whole case. Where were your clothes when blah, 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 blah? Right? And then maybe he'd give him a response. Okay? What were you wearing when blah, blah, blah? What was blah, blah wearing? Was blah, blah still wearing? Was blah, blah wear his sweats and tee the whole time? Again, by asking that, it doesn't say that they ought to be off. We want to avoid suggesting that clothes need to be off or were off. And let the kid give us that if it's in the case. In an attempt to do that, Giselle says, how are your clothes? Which throws us in some other, who's not effective. I'm sorry, go ahead.
When you say non-responsive, I know it's in the text, but when you say non-responsive and responsive answers, responsive being that the child effectively, well, in our
They answer the wrong question is
Was
non-responsive.
non-responsive.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just it's a little bit subjective that they're being non-responsive. But, you know, like you said, some things are apparent. What color was the crayon? My skateboard. Okay, that would be non-responsive. You ask the question about color of a crayon, and he responds skateboard. That's non-responsive. That's an easy one, right? And even here, how are your underwear? We don't judge people here. We're just saying Giselle wanted to know how his underwear, how were your clothes? Giselle was trying to find out how they were on his body, whether they're on or off or something else, and it's non-responsive because he tells us the design. Okay, so that's what I mean by non-responsive. They're responding, they're uttering something, but it's not responding to the question. And here, if I didn't tell you, most people go, I don't even know what the hell she's asking. How are your clothes? You know? Pretty smelly. So, you got an example there. And what more importantly, you have the boxers and briefs, though. This wasn't about how are your clothes. I put this video here a couple years back for the boxers and briefs. And let me give you an example of how this could play out, especially this boxer and briefs. Why we have to be ever vigilant with these kids being literal. And, you know, I remember, you know, when I first went to the juvenile division, kids, you know, they would call the place where they live the projects. You say, you live in the apartments down on Grand Street? Huh? No, man. You don't live in those apartments at the top of Grand? I live in the projects, man, by Marshall and Grant. Yeah, Grant, the apartments. You know, the projects are projects. Apartments are apartments. Houses are houses. You know, kids learn very specific references to the things in their life. Some of them are cultural references. And, you know, it's creating the potential for miscommunication and sometimes critical miscommunication. You know, I remember I lived in, to show you my bias, you know, I lived in a very expensive, rather expensive condominiums in the neighborhood of where I work. And I was in the juvenile division, and a kid was accused of, with others, of burglarizing some of the condominiums up there. And the judge said to the boy who turned state's evidence in this juvenile prosecution, where did you put the car stereos? Where'd you hide them? You know, back to a couple of those projects up there on Quartz Lane. You're going, projects at Quartz Lane. My apartment was the projects there, and that's where the stash was in the back of it. It was synonymous with apartments. Here, with boxers and briefs, imagine if this boy made a statement to Dykus, and he said that the actor, the perpetrator, put his hand under my boxers. First of all, he told Dykus, he pulled down my pants and I had underwear on, and then he put his hand under my underwear onto my private part, onto my penis. Okay, that's what's written in the Dykus report. Well, that's what the Dykus worker hears. Dykus worker writes that the boy was fondled on his body, under his clothes, under his pants and his underwear. Giselle is interviewing him, imagine later, and she says to him, when he put his hand under your pants, did he put them on top of your underwear or underneath your underwear? And he says to her, I wasn't wearing no underwear. And Giselle says, okay, you didn't have on any underwear and he put his hand under your pants on your privates, yeah. Now you got a conflict, right? In the Dykus report, she writes the boy said that he put his hand under his pants and under his underwear. Why? Because he told the Dykus worker he put his hand under my pants and underneath my boxers, onto my wiener. So now we use the generic term underwear in our report. Giselle asks, using that word, whether he had underwear on, and he says, I didn't have any underwear on. She infers he's naked. He's just got shorts on, no underpants. You follow what I'm saying? Because underwear to him are very specific. I'll call them, I don't know if they're tighty whities or just jockey, you know, whatever you call it, briefs. To him, they're briefs, and he wasn't wearing no briefs. But you can see how the original responder, the first responder, writes down, he used the word, I had on my shorts. I just came from school, and I had on my shorts and my boxers, and he put his hand under my shorts and under my boxers. First responder writes, boy explains that perpetrator put his hand under his pants and under his underwear onto his private parts. Later, Giselle asks him if that's true. He says, I never had any underwear on. I wasn't wearing underwear. Now Giselle's got it in her head that he had pants on and no underwear. He's naked underneath the pants. You see, boxers, briefs, and now you got an inconsistency. And he may be cross-examined and say, I never told anybody that I had on underwear, And then the worker, or the first responders, like, certainly did. But again, it's just a different language. He's talking, they're different things to him. Look, is this going to make or break a case? No. These are the little things that we're learning about language. The way to avoid this error, if you're the first responder, say the child protection worker on the scene, or a police officer, or even a teacher who gets a disclosure in school, and this is why I just got done teaching a program for guidance workers last week, and a large part of it is writing and documentation. You know, like we encourage you first responders to use the words of who? The child. And what would we, in documentation, what would we put around the words? That's a language quotation. It seems silly, but people don't do it. Boy reports that he was wearing his boxers and shorts. I would put quotes around. Boy reports, I was wearing my boxers and shorts, unquote. Use quotes as much as you can, especially if it relates to critical elements of the case. You know, if the question was about, do you like school? Yeah, but I really hate math. If you're in a report building, you don't need to put in any say, I really hate math, in quotes. That's not critical. It was talking about who's wearing what clothes they were wearing, things that he did, terms of art. You know, now we're going to play the milk the cow game. You want to put milk the cow. Those are the words that came from him. That's a peculiar characterization. You want to make sure that you identify that by the use of quotation marks. Now, here's another example of a developmental thing that can get us into trouble. And egocentricity. Okay? Children who are preschoolers, children who are less than 5, tend to be very egocentric. And children from 0 to about 4 have a tough time with egocentricity. They see the world as revolving around them. They don't realize that other people have other perspectives. Okay? They cannot see other people's viewpoints or look at something from the perspective of another. So if you had a 4-year-old and her brother Billy was in the play area where the wooden blocks were, and something was happening to her next to the big screen TV, she would not be able to answer what Billy may or may not have been able to see with any degree of confidence or reliability, because she cannot put herself in the shoes of another person. They see the world revolving around themselves. Now they lose that about 3 or 4. Some of the more advanced kids have 3 or 4, and they begin to realize that the world doesn't totally revolve around them, and that people have different perspectives. And another way to think about this is they can't see themselves outside of their own bodies. It's a very difficult thing for little ones, primarily preschoolers, which means that we would not be able to use, what's your first name? Melissa. What would we not be able to use if the child is so egocentric that they can't see themselves outside of their own body? Melissa? Dolls. Oh, thank you. The dolls. Why? Because the dolls are symbolic. The dolls are representative of them, and if they can't see something as representative of themselves, we're going to create more trouble with the dolls rather than helping the case. We're going to create confusion. So we don't use dolls for children who are unable to make the representational shift or have unable to get past their egocentricity. Go ahead, Melissa.
No, it's just when you start mentioning dolls and
Yes.
Because in my other classroom, we were just talking about colorism and that experiment they did with the dolls years ago.
What was the first word? What is it?
Colorism.
Colorism. Okay, go ahead.
And we were actually discussing that experiment they did with the little black girls with the dolls. And they asked them to identify which doll they thought was prettier or kind of looks more like them.
Right.
Or which doll they deemed was better. Yet they all picked the black doll. So, and then I think someone else did the same experiment years later and they found that it was the same results.
How old were the children in the experiment? You know?
They said they were around the age of 3, 4.
You sure about that? Around and 3, 4.
About 5 no, like 5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6. They probably were a little older than 3 or 4. I would guess that under 3 or 4, you probably get a different result. It doesn't undermine the inference that we can draw from the results about color, perceptions of beauty, and those kind of things. And simply because the kids at 3, 4, and less, you know, they couldn't even be able to begin to answer that question because they don't see the dolls representing themselves. They can't make so then they can't say, well, that doll's prettier than me or less than pretty or whatever that experiment is. So you was something you talked about recently in the class? Yeah. Anyway, let's see if you can identify the example of egocentricity in this clip, which may take a moment to get going here.
But she yelled at me.
Who?
My teacher.
Oh, okay. And here's the other thing about egocentricity and why it's so critical for you as a forensic interviewer. Not only does the child have difficulty seeing themselves outside of their own body, not only does the child struggle with seeing the perspective of others. They can't tell you mom's perspective or their brother Billy's perspective. They can't. The whole world revolves around that. The other thing is they think that you know what they know. Like they're the whole world. Like if if they go to Scooby-Doo for ice cream, everybody goes to Scooby-Doo for ice cream. If they have pretty sneakers with bumblebees on them, everybody has pretty sneakers with bumblebee on them. Everybody knows that you've got pretty sneakers with bumblebee on them for your birthday. The whole world knows you, and you know the whole world. Everybody knows everybody. The whole world revolves around you, and you're a part of that world. And that's a problem because then the child thinks you know what happened to them. And we recommend that we say this liberally during a forensic interview. What do you think we might recommend that an interviewer say liberally? Liberally means quite often and a lot with children who are under 6, let's say. What would be something you need to communicate to them repeatedly?
That you don't know them, that you need to tell you what's going on because you don't know.
Right. And you're right. And the way we express that is, you're absolutely right. The way we express that is, Danielle, I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened when, everything fell on the birthday party or whatever happened, or when the teacher came to the closet. I wasn't there, Danielle, and I don't know what happened. So you need to tell me everything that happened. And you need to say that once or twice. Then you go, this happened, that happened, this happened. Okay, tell me what happened next. And then you know what, Danielle, I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened, so you need to tell me. Okay? So this boy is the perfect example for cognitive egocentricity. He is befuddled that Fran doesn't know his teachers, doesn't know his classmates. What do you mean you don't know these people? He's having a major problem with that. And Fran handles it quietly and expertly. She just tells him no. Now, she might have done what I just said, might have been a little bit better. She does it kind of low-key, but she might have said very emphatically, listen, I don't know everyone who knows you. I wasn't there, and you need to tell me everything that happened from beginning to end. Whoops.
But she yelled at me.
Who?
My teacher.
Which one?
The mean one. She's mean. She's like, sit down!
Which teacher is that?
She's mean.
What's her name? She yells at you to sit down?
You haven't seen this before?
No, I haven't met her.
Why not? She's your friend?
No, she's not my friend. I don't know who she is.
You know who my teacher is, Miss?
No, I don't know who any of your teachers are.
You know my friend name?
I just know you and your mom.
And you don't know my friend name?
Who's your friend?
Huh?
I don't know him.
So you can see how that can get bad real fast. Here the child's making assumptions about who you know, and they think that everybody's a part of their world, teachers and their friends, and it's important that the interviewer make it clear to the child that they don't know. And if what Fran probably could have done differently there was emphasize that. She says, I don't know any of these people, but give him the standard, emphatic, loud and clear. You know, whatever his name is, Daniel, I want to know everything that happened. And you ask me whether I know your teacher, and I don't know your teacher. And you ask me whether I know your friends, and I don't know your friends. Because I just met you today, and I don't know anybody who you go to school with. And I want you to tell me everything that happened from beginning to end in the cloakroom with Mr. X. But I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened. So tell me what happened so I know. Something like that. I wasn't there. You need to tell me what happened from beginning to end. Fran probably should have done that at any point there. Even though she's telling him I don't know, but she should have addressed it globally. You know what I'm saying by globally? Addressed it in a larger sense so that this boy doesn't regress to that kind of cognitive egocentricity at other times during the interview. Should have been very emphatic about it. Any questions about that? The English language is among the most difficult for anyone, especially people who come from another culture and they have English as a second language. It's very challenging. I mean, look at a word like laugh. Who came up with that spelling? Well, we have so many words, again, that sound the same, but mean different things. We have so many words that are spelled the same and pronounced differently. I was just thinking about the word break. I was doing a crossword puzzle. And the response that was called for was the car brake. And I forgot what the clue was. Now, this brake has to be B-R-A-K. B-R-E-A-K, right? B-R-A-K. Somebody had to come up with that brake for the thing that stops a car or a bike or something else. Kids have a hard time distinguishing between those words. So it can be very difficult when they're dealing with homonyms and those kinds of linguistic challenges. Some of the things you'll see when you interview your kids and you're going to talk about in discussion boards are homonym errors and something else we call auditory discrimination errors. And I tell you to look it up. I want you to look it up, but I'll give you a little clue about what they mean. And essentially, an auditory discrimination error is when a child hears a word. Okay? They hear a word. They don't understand the word, but instead of telling us they don't understand it, they simply answer us. And they take that word and they approximate what it means in their own head. Well, it sounds like this, so it must be that. And then they operate under the assumption that that word is that. I confuse you enough. But I'll give you an example of my linguist friend Alice Greenwood said one time. It's a beautiful auditory discrimination error. Again, they take a word that they don't understand and they try to make it meaningful to them. So they connected it up to a word that approximates the sound of the word that they don't understand. The problem is they don't tell us they don't understand it. And they ask questions and they speak in the context of this word without letting us know if they got it wrong or telling us in some way what the word is. Alice Greenwood was a linguist who helped teach a course for him to interview. about 8 or 9 years ago, and she said that her husband, and her 5-year-old daughter went to Manhattan, and her husband was supposed to go on a business trip that Monday to Los Angeles, and they went to the show. It was a show for kids, and it was in Midtown Manhattan, and he parked his car there, and when he came back, okay, with his wife and the 5-year-old, they noticed the window was smashed, and his trench coat was gone, and his ticket to Los Angeles for the business trip. And he was so upset and angry, he started screaming in the middle of the street. They went home, and he was very upset. A couple of days later, the little girl, the 5-year-old, goes to her mother. She says, "Did they catch the fox?" And her mother says, "What? Leave me alone, I'm washing the dishes." And she says, "No, the fox. Did they catch the fox?" "What fox, honey? What fox?" "You know, the fox." "What fox?" "The fox who took Daddy's trench coat and tickets for California. Did they catch the fox?" "Well, Daddy," Alice tells us later, said, at the time that the window was smashed, "those fucks, they took my tickets to Los Angeles, California." So in her mind, she saw a little red orange fox came in, a little swiper. You know swiper? Yeah. Swiper went in. And that child was operating with that picture in her head. Why? Because she heard that word. She don't understand that word. So, she approximates it. Very similar. That's an auditory discrimination error. Fox, that's a perfect auditory discrimination error. And she anthropomorphized it, I guess, or gave it a very distinguishable meaning by turning it into a fox. And you'll see that. And you'll see that when you talk to your kids. Be aware of the way your kids answer some of these questions, whether they make any auditory discrimination errors. You'll see a couple of them that are recurring. I've been doing this project for 7 years now, and there are a few that are recurring. It's a kind of a fun way to see it in action. Remember, don't force the kids to do anything. Remember that we never want to say to kids in a forensic context, "Tell me what you think this means," or what you think happened. But here, this is an exception. I want you to try to get them to say what they think it means. Not first up. I just want you to ask them, what is a jury? Why do judges wear black robes? Those kinds of things. And then if they don't know, say, "Well, why do you think?" And let them give you a response. Any questions? Yes.
When interviewing small children, you said it's best to begin with open-ended questions and get more specific?
Correct. It's best to, and I'm going to post a PowerPoint later on in one of these learning units that I did the other day, and where I address this. It's called the process of inquiry, and I make the point, as you just emphasized, you want to start out open-ended. It's kind of like a funnel, if you can think of that metaphor. You start out wide, you narrow, and sometimes you might have to ask specific, bop-them-on-the-head questions. But anytime you ask a specific bop-them-on-the-head question, Sarah, you always follow up with what? An open-ended question. Okay? Is that your driver's license in your bag, Sarah? No. Is that your Montclair State University ID in your bag, Sarah? Yes. That's a direct, suggestive, leading question. Tell me all about that Montclair State ID. Well, I had to get up in the morning and go down. They took my picture, but they did it wrong. I asked you a direct, specific, leading, suggestive, information-rich question. All you could do is go, yes. Now, maybe I needed to do that, so now I said, tell me all about that. When you need to resort to a direct question, always follow up with an open-ended question. Another lesson of the day. And I think I said that a couple of weeks ago too. Any other questions? Let's take a look at the perspective for next week. Okay. I found these all different places and put them all on one little slide here. This is called the Family Circus. It's about kids, cartoon strip in the Sunday paper, typically. And you see the mom here actually doing it. That's Grandma. Anyway, and I think that's Billy, this boy's name is. But they're there. We can't do saying cute things. They might be made. Now he appears to have a cotton candy in his hand. A cotton what do you call that? Cotton candy. Cotton candy. They might be made from the same thing, but cotton candy tastes better than my shirt. Okay. Now that's what kind of error would that be? Auditory discrimination or homonym error?
Auditory.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, 50% chance.
I don't know the other one.
A homonym error is a word that's spelled the same and means different things, right? I think. Something like that. So the cotton candy and the cotton shirt are two different cottons, right? It might not be perfect, but close. Here's another one. Grandma, this chili you made isn't chili at all. That's another homonym error, but the chilies, this one is spelled differently. They might even have a more precise word in language for this, like words that are spelled the same and sound the same and mean different things. Words that sound the same, spelled differently and mean different things. This is different from cotton. This is cotton here, means different things. This is chili, different spelling chili and also means different things. Here, what's your first name again? Carla. Is that it right? Carla. Mine's exactly like yours. It's an ice cream clone. Homonym error or auditory discrimination error? Say it out loud. You did it before.
No.
The one you said
Auditory
an auditory discrimination error, right? Because he's confusing the word clone with the word cone. Okay, it's not your typical thing. You would think that he would confuse clone with cone, not cone with clone. He's still using a different word, a similar word to describe the cone, but it's something completely different. Watch my step, Mommy, but Mommy, I'm sitting down. Now that's not an auditory discrimination error or a homonym error, but it's an example of what? Some other concept we talked about today. What's your first name? Kimberly. Children can be very literal, right? Literal. Is he being literal? Is Mom being literal? Mom's using what? A figure of speech, right? Mom's using a figure of speech. She said, watch your step, boy. Well, you're not going to go out tonight. Or you're not going to, whatever. She said, watch your step. Okay? That's a figurative statement, right? Watch your step. What does watch your step mean? Behave. Essentially means behave. Kind of be careful, but it's not even be careful. It's behave. Watch your step, young man, or you're going to be in trouble with me. And he says, but Mommy, I'm sitting down, so how can I watch my step, right? It's not going to happen. Watch your step with the wisecrack linguistic comebacks, boy.
Is that also like a non-responsive?
Yeah, it's certainly non-responsive too, right? Watch my step, but she's not asking a question, She's just making a statement. He's taking her statement very literal. Why is it never tomorrow, Mommy? Every time I wake up, it's today again. Which is, I don't know what that is, but it's funny. Kind of ties into children and time and sequence and today and tomorrow. So any excuse me. Any questions about this stuff?